You are watching OUM second annual public lecture series live from WTC Kuala Lumpur. Our program will continue shortly with public lecture 4 by Professor Felicitas titled Futures of Care in Digital Education. Please stay with us. Stay tuned.
Ladies and gentlemen, could you please kindly take your seats as we'll begin the afternoon sessions.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I now invite Dr. David Lim to lead us through our 2 afternoon lectures.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the second half of the annual public lecture series, part second year. A quick recap. In the first lecture, we heard about ground practice. Second lecture was about governance. The third lecture, we took a philosophical turn. And in this fourth lecture, we're going to take another philosophical turn to look at something deeper, which I believe is something needed in the studies of education, which might not be a thing in Malaysian academia, but it's something definitely that we should be listening to closely. Professor Felicitas Macgilchrist. She is Professor of Digital Education and Schooling at the Oldenburg University, where she heads the RELAB, Oldenburg's Laboratory for the Futures of Educational Technology. Her research looks at the culture and politics of educational technology through critical ethnographic and speculative eyes. She works on the ethics of AI in education, on the infrastructure beneath our digital tools, on the small, everyday utopias of the classroom. She is co-editor of the cutting-edge journal, Learning, Media and Technology, and her recent books include Designing Post-Digital Futures and Post-Digital Futures, Participation in Education. Her lecture today is titled Futures of Care in Digital Education. Her lecture begins somewhere unexpected, with rage, with honest anger at the state of the world. From there, it turns to care, to the quiet, unseen work that keeps digital education alive and that no one thinks to count. And it asks what becomes possible when we design digital education not from efficiency and speed, but from care, from hope, and from imagination. Please join me in welcoming Professor Felicitas Macgilchrist.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Here. Okay. Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, esteemed guests. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here today, and it's really an honor and a delight to be Global Fellow this year. David Lim and his team are fantastic hosts. They've been looking after us very well, and the conversations so far have been really interesting. So as David said in his very kind introduction, my name is Felicitas Macgilchrist. I study the politics of educational technologies, and especially these small, tiny parts. The politics of small things, minor gestures, and politics of the quotidian. And this is why I want to speak today about the futures of care in digital education. Care is a myriad of small quotidian gestures. It can seem utterly boring, domestic, mundane background, but I want to suggest today that care is one of the most radical things that we can do in digital education. The day-to-day patterns of care, if we really enact them, would be a key way to move beyond standard scripts as our theme today. Imagining more care in the design, in the development, in the administration, in the practices, in the technologies of education is one way to imagine new futures in digital education, as our theme says. However, care can easily be experienced as paternalism or as empty rhetoric. It needs to be grounded and rooted in the world. And since the world is such a mess today, I need to embed care in rage, as David said, and hope first. So I'm going to start with rage, then move to hope, and then move to care. And these three concepts prepare the ground for a set of methods, very concrete methods, for speculative futuring that I hope allow us to imagine and build new worlds. So I'm really focusing on the imagination part of our theme today. So let me start with rage, because the philosophy that I work with argues that we need to acknowledge the negative before we can get anywhere near hope or care or better futures. This is the context in which we teach, so we need to pay attention to this. So in digital education, whatever we build, learning management systems, AI tutors, adaptive assessment systems, the next EdTech platform, we build it and we teach with it and we learn with it in the world, not in experimental conditions, which are important, not in policy papers, which are also important, and not in startup pitch decks, which are also important. We teach and learn in the world as it currently is. And I want to name 3 things about the world today, which I think you know, but I would like to remind us of those before I go further. So the first 2 pictures, the world is at war and the planet is burning. So there are almost 200 ongoing conflicts were recorded last year. Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, Myanmar, many more that never make our front pages. And humans around the world are also impacted by higher temperatures, more wildfires, increased flooding, worse air pollution, to name just a few of these things. There are lots of data that one could talk about this. I'm going to try and move past this quickly. But the third picture shows young people, the students that digital education aims to serve in schools and in higher education. They're not okay. A recent UNICEF study, to name just one study, which included respondents in Malaysia, asked 14 to 25-year-olds how they perceive the mental health impact of today's world. So 14 to 25-year-olds, 6 in 10 responded that they feel overwhelmed by news and events, and 4 in 10 responded that they need help with their mental health. That means nearly 1 in every 2 of the younger students that we're dealing with in schools and in higher education, of the student age population, want support with mental health issues. There are lots of reasons for these numbers, but I think what is clear is that young people are feeling pressure. And third, the final box, the connections between digital technologies and far-right politics. This is perhaps most obvious in the US, where big tech platform owners sit beside presidents and tech billionaires are becoming the first trillionaires in the world. But we see this tech-driven threat to democracy across the world. Lots of examples. Social scientists, humanities scholars have come up with different names for these politics: surveillance capitalism, data colonialism, algorithms of oppression, down to techno-fascism and cyber-libertarianism. The one thing that I think is key for us in this context is these politics are inscribed into the standards, the wiring, the code, the infrastructure of the technologies which promise solutions for education. And this is a major tension at the core of digital education. How do we do the humanizing, the democratizing, using these technologies which have different politics inscribed into them? So, you can see with these examples, I'm talking about the negative repercussions of something that we call progress in the world. So what do we do with this polycrisis? Many people feel powerless. Some people feel despair. Many are angry. I've titled this aspect Rage. Angry at the decisions that human beings have made and keep making, which have led to our current situation. And this is where hope comes in. Hope is not optimism. I want to separate hope from optimism here. Optimism assumes that things are going to get better. Optimism is like a certainty about the future. Yeah, it'll be fine, it'll be fine, it will be fine. It can mean that it's a refusal to look squarely at the way the world is at the moment. Hope is different. Hope has been called a philosophical concept. It's an orientation towards possibility, towards contingency, towards what could still change. And it sees the potential that things don't have to stay the way they are today. So most philosophies of hope start from despair or rage. And I've got a couple of examples with me. Kierkegaard said, "We must despair fully, despair with a vengeance," he writes, "before the life of the spirit can break through." Paulo Freire said his book, Pedagogy of Hope, was written in rage and love, without which there is no hope. Corinne Pellerson, a philosopher of ecology, she writes that genuine hope doesn't conceal the fact that the catastrophe is coming, but it finds words to show how we might avoid the catastrophe, or at least words to create something different in place of the catastrophe. Robin Kelly, in Freedom Dreams, he asks how we can move through bitterness and cynicism towards love, hope, and a fuller dream of freedom, especially, he stresses, in rough times like these. I have one more. Lola Olufemi wants hope as a commitment to see through, around, and beyond unending misery. So we can see what's common in all of these quotes here. These are just some of the quotes in this direction. In every one of these thinkers, hope is not opposed to rage or bitterness or despair or cynicism. It grows from the negative. The key is that hope only emerges when better times seem possible, maybe improbable, but not impossible. So hope in this sense is a practice. It's what we do when we don't ignore the context in which education happens. And I think we have to agree that quite often in digital education, we sort of do ignore the context. So that's why I wanted to remind us of this. I know it's something you all know, but to remember this is the context: the planetary crises, the psychological distress, the anti-democratic technopolitics. This is where we ground our education, our technology, our learning systems, our AI systems, our educational leadership, our digital practices. We can ground them in the mess of the world today and hope for different things. And this is the hope I want to bring into our conversation about the future of digital education. It also brings me to care, the next step on our path. We're heading towards speculative practices. So in Oldenburg, we've been developing care as an approach to research that gives us both a critical, analytical concept as well as a politically hopeful concept to engage with the mess of today's world. So we draw on work like these texts here, and we understand care in education as work. It's the ongoing, unequally distributed, historically invisibilized work of attending to people and relations and vulnerability and independency and more, and also attending to the social, technical, emotional, and planetary conditions that make digital education possible at all. So as one of my colleagues says, care is the work of maintaining the futures of others. And it's often invisible work. So some examples from our field here. Think of the distance learning tutor who notices a student has gone quiet in the forum for a few weeks and reaches out before someone drops out. Or the open education team who spend extra hours making sure that the MOOC, we heard about MOOCs earlier, works for a student on a slow connection in a rural area, not just the well-resourced learner that the platform was perhaps designed around. Or the lecturer who spends her creative energies trying to create exam questions that ChatGPT cannot answer well, so that the students genuinely learn something. That work rarely appears in workload models. It's the quotidian, the everyday, the background work of care. So I'm going to move to speculative practices shortly, but first, it's important not to romanticize care. It's not just a fuzzy, warm, comfortable thing. There's always a danger of becoming surveillance or becoming paternalism, but nothing works or survives or thrives without care from others, from relations. So when we turn to speculative practices in a minute, I want to invite you to remember the rage and the hope and this politics of care, to remember to imagine, when we're imagining, specific day-to-day practices. Who is attended to by whom, under what conditions, at what cost, and who pays the cost of doing the care. So, and that brings me to the final chunk, which is a longer chunk of the talk, speculative practices. So, many scholars have been thinking about speculative practices in education. There's a wealth of wonderful writing out there. I have a slide at the end with some references. A core impetus draws from science fiction, or speculative fabulation, and the suspension of disbelief that powers these forms of fiction. My favorite science fiction author, Ursula K. Le Guin, says, science fiction or speculative work provokes us to ask, why are things as they are? Must they be as they are? And what might they be like if they were otherwise? You can hear some echoes of the talks from earlier in what I'm saying just now. So we don't just want to be thinking about what works. What works is important, but we don't just want to think about what works. We want counterfactual thinking that asks, what if? And imagines what is not yet So in this way, speculative thinking connects a critique of the present with the envisioning of alternatives. The core challenge is that it's very difficult to imagine something that is out with the realms of what you can imagine. It's hard to imagine the unimaginable. So here I draw on my background in cultural anthropology. I was trained by anthropologists, and Ghassan Haj has said of speculative and utopian thought that it's not actually about what doesn't exist. It is instead metonymic of minor and repressed spaces in which we already dwell in the present. It's a way of getting out of the dominant reality, away from standard scripts, but it is still emanating from and speaking to the reality in which we live. So the challenge remains, how do we get access to these minor and repressed spaces? When I have had the opportunity of observing people engaging in speculative practices, I often see them staying within what is for them culturally dominant spaces, the standard scripts. So we try all sorts of different modes and methods of trying to move out of those standard scripts or dominant spaces. And what we need is concrete methods. So one method is to give a political system prompt, the way we give system prompts to the large language models. So this has been my goal for the past few minutes of tracing the path from rage through hope to care. If we had another hour now, David said I cannot have another hour. If we had another hour, I would change the room into circles and we would do some speculative practices. So I would invite you to join me to thinking about what the future of education could be like, using these prompts from rage and hope and care. But more specifically and more concretely, Jen Ross and others have made a strong case for working with research methods and practice methods from design fiction, from speculative design, and from critical design. And I want to use my final minutes, my last chunk of minutes, to illustrate the approach of concrete methods from speculative practices with a very simple method, which I have found particularly inventive. Sometimes it's hard to do it in formal spaces, but I found it particularly productive, card decks. So I have brought with me 3 sets of card decks designed for collective speculation about the future of education, digital education. Each of these card decks can be used with educators, with leaders, with students, and with others to create change. They can also be used as research methods to observe and analyze what kinds of change are thinkable at the moment. So, 3 sets. This is the first set, Higher Education Futures, from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, offers 8 scenarios that are intended to provoke new conversations about what a university could be. I've brought 2 longer examples with me. There are only 8 cards in this card deck. I've brought 2 longer ones. So one is the AI Academy. I'm going to read this. In the AI Academy, machine learning and AI are university infrastructure. AIs working across massive linked databases do all the heavy lifting of academic work, from literature reviews to student assessment. Surveillance is pervasive, from the movement of staff around campus to students' attendance, engagement, and behaviours. Acceptance of this is high because the gains are significant and very few care about eroded privacy rights. Information is continually sifted, sorted, and pushed to students, academics, and administrators on a just-in-time basis and with infinite granularity. Conventional student assignments are no longer required, as AI-enabled analysis of historic, behavioural, and neurodata provides an instant categorization of their capacities. No one writes essays or reports anymore because AI does it better. That's one image for the future of higher education. A second one, I only have 2 from this card deck. So, justice-driven innovation. In this scenario, unrest arising from acute societal division and unequal access to wealth promotes radical political change and pressure to develop new economic, social, and governance models. Universities' third mission, to create and share knowledge to address societal challenges, becomes their first mission. In the large research-intensive universities, disciplinary structures give way to radical transdisciplinarity, focused on specific social challenge areas: poverty, climate, equality, governance, justice. Universities collaborate to build their own open learning platforms as there is a mass move away from for-profit data extractive big tech infrastructure. This globally accessible, digital, open learning is woven through local context-specific autonomous eco-versities, and there are many partnerships between higher education and community-based movements. So the other scenarios are also offer very different ideas for what the future of higher education could be. Sean Bain and her team in Edinburgh have used these scenarios also with senior management at their university in Edinburgh to rethink their future plans for the development of the university. I have no information about what they decided, though. So the next card deck, Reimagining Algorithmic Futures. This one's more specifically about digital education. This team asked developers, students, critics, and perhaps also the public to surface the human values usually left out of algorithmic design. It's about building a new vocabulary which takes care into account to assist with decision-making and also with designing the systems, also with implementing the systems. So each card has a question. There are 63 cards. One way to play the game together is to choose an example. No. Okay, I'll do this and then I've got a conclusion. Okay. So each card has a question. So we choose a system. We choose a system for assessing or grading student writing. Our example system is an AI system for assessing or grading student writing. It's something that's talked about a lot just now. So we can ask here the top question: what's difficult or impossible to encode in the automated assessment system? We can ask about replacement. What aspects of human work, the human work of grading student writing, cannot be replaced? We can ask questions about thresholds. Who defines and implements the threshold? Who decides what counts as a pass or a fail, or the difference between an A and a B? And one more, responsibility. Does the system affect how professionals uphold their standards about what counts as success, what counts as good writing? So, right. The next set of cards, I'm going to skip over. If anyone has a question about them, I could go back to them. I'm going to jump past these cards and go straight to the conclusion, because what's important to me is if we design digital education from rage, hope, and care, these card decks, they offer us a method, a concrete method to sit down and have conversations. They don't offer solutions. There's no answers. I'm not here to tell you what's important here, but they help us cultivate a disposition. They help us find words to describe how futures can be otherwise. They invite us to leave our comfort zone. They invite us to say, I don't know. Let me think for a minute. I don't know, which is very important if we're going to suggest futures or different futures. So I want to suggest that speculative practices only make sense. Imagining new futures for digital education only makes sense if we first go through anger or despair or rage or frustration, and also hope and also care, and then ask questions about what makes sense in the context that we're in, for the students that we have, for the teachers that we have, for the educators that we have. From a design and development perspective, I have really enjoyed using these to see how people imagine new futures. And from a research perspective, utilizing methods like these, and these are only some examples, we can watch new knowledge emerge that really challenges what we thought we knew before. And with that, I thank you for your attention. I have some colleagues that I thought with, some references. The card decks are all online and all available. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Felicitas. Just a little confession here. When we first conceived this second annual public lectures, of course, we considered the backgrounds of all the global fellows, but one of the earliest ones that we thought about was Felicitas' work on speculative futures of digital education. Her approach to digital education is pretty unique, I think, by Malaysian standards. We tend to be more practice-based, more framework-based, but here we are playing with imagination, with the hope of imagining or beginning to imagine the unimaginable, which is actually a very difficult task if you don't enter into a more playful mode, I think. So on that note, I would like to invite questions from the floor, if there are any. Yes, other gentleman. in beige suit. Did you want to stand in front? There's a mic there. Please, could you share with us your name and where you're from before? Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be with the wonderful speakers from the world here. I am Pradeep Kumar, made in India, learning with UITM. Why learning? Because teaching is more learning and less teaching. So I just have two questions for you. How do you differentiate digital education from intellectual education? Okay, that's number one. Number two is, how do you think that AI, or what you call, if you call it a digital education, can take our students from memory to imagination? Am I making sense?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So
Very-
can we give
Thank
you
you,
the
Prof.
opportunity to answer?
Thank you, Prof.
Very provocative questions. Thank you.
Thank
How do I differentiate digital education from intellectual education? I would hope that digital education is always intellectual education. I'm not sure if intellectual education, if you mean something specific by that, but I'm understanding it as education which is for intellectual development, progress, talent development, as was said earlier. So digital education is the kind of education which uses technologies to do that, to progress intellectual progress, development, future thinking, any kind of thinking. I would also say at the moment there's almost no education which is not also digital education. There's almost no education which doesn't involve some kind of technology, but there is digital education which is far more involved with technologies. And these technologies should be used for intellectual, for affective, emotional, all kinds of learning in that sense. That's the first. And the second, AI, to take from memory to imagination.
Well, would that have something to do with memorizing to imagining? Is that what you meant by the question?
Okay, to clarify my question, because when my students go to AI, they find tons and tons of memory, okay, which are coming onto the screen. The question is, how can digital education transform them or transport them from a world of memory which is all there in tons and tons in AI or digital education into creating a new kind of imagination?
I would contest the idea that what AI presents is memory, because it's statistical probabilities and not memory. So, but from that basis, I understand that part of the question is being also how to use AI systems, probably generative AI in particular, but all the other AI systems, to really create original, inventive, imaginative thinking. And my answer would always, to almost every AI question, my answer is critical AI. To support students, learners, to engage critically with what they see. I think there's two things that are important. One thing is some understanding of the mechanics. I do this with my students in my home university. Often I ask them how they understand how AI works, because every semester they answer something different, because the understanding of these systems is changing quickly as well. So I ask them how they understand it, and then I add in a couple of things. No, we don't all need to become computer scientists, but we need to understand something about the training data. There's training data there, where it comes from, how it was put together, what's missing from the training data, the systematic bias that's in the training data, and they need to understand something about the statistical probability of how responses are produced. That's enough technical for everybody. And from that basis then to say, okay, ask something about which you are an expert. And my students have asked about Harry Potter and things like this, or about their hobbies and things. And then they see the holes in the response, and then they understand how to critically engage with these systems, and then they're moving towards imaginative thinking in that sense.
Right, thank you very much. Maybe we will field one more question before we move on to the final speaker. All right, well, if not, then we will just invite you to thank Professor Felicitas with me for the really
Thank you.
thought-provoking lecture.
And thank you for your attention and your questions.
All right, As we progress now to the final speaker, who is Professor Bart Rienties. He is Professor of Learning Analytics and Director of the Institute of Educational Technology at the Open University in the United Kingdom. An educational psychologist by training, he studies how people learn together and the part that social connection plays in learning. His work spans learning analytics, learning design, and motivation. He leads a £5 million research hub for the United Kingdom's Economic and Social Research Council. He is also president of the Society of Learning Analytics Research, the largest community of its kind in the world. His lecture today is titled, Beyond Intelligent Automation, Reimagining Human-Centered Futures for Digital Education. It begins with a simple question. If we were to invent the university today in a world of artificial intelligence, would it look anything like the one we have? His lecture asks who gets to shape what comes next, and it insists that even as the machines grow clever, it is the human thing, trust, belonging, judgment that matter most. Please join me in welcoming Professor Bart Rienties.
Right. David already gave this amazing prompt. First of all, I'm no longer the president of the Society of Learning Analytics Research, so I take no responsibility for whatever happens now. But coming back to the question, we've seen 4 amazing talks this morning and this afternoon. And it sparked a lot of thoughts in me, and I guess hopefully also in you. So coming back to the question that I wanted to ask every one of you is, if universities were invented today, not like in Bologna or Oxford or in China, as you see here today, if they would be invented today, would they look the same? I'm going to give you 10 seconds to think about it, and then I will ask you to vote. So who thinks that the universities of today would more or less still look the same? 1, David, thank you. 2. Professor Yamaguchi, thank you very much for that. Who thinks that the universities, if we would invent them today, would look completely different? Oh my God. I think the public lectures have already worked. That's very good. So I think this is a very deceptive and simple question. It forces us, and I think we've been, in a way, very much already confronted about our own beliefs today, but it confronts us the big question of why are we actually teaching, and what is education actually for? And that's a really big question. Across the world, I was very pleased also to see all the amazing data from Professor Yamaguchi. Even the United Nations is working on AI, governments are investing heavily, students are using ChatGPT and other systems very intensively. But I think what we're been discussing today, if I'm really honest, is I think we're asking the wrong question. We're no longer asking the question, oh, sorry, I'm pressing the wrong button. The question is not whether AI is going to change higher education. It has already, right? And what I specifically want to focus on, and I loved all the talks, but I think what was kind of missing was to hear the voices from the students. So if you, for example, look at a study in the UK that has been running for the last 3 years about what are students actually doing with Gen AI, actually 94% of students in the UK already admit that they use Gen AI for assessments, up from 54% 2 years ago. When you think about how people are actually using AI across the globe. There are some latest statistics from OpenAI, which is just one platform. This one platform, apparently 10% of the world population is using this on a weekly basis. If you think about that, that is incredible. 10% of the world population using this on a weekly basis, and that's just one of the many Gen AI tools. And what is really fascinating, and it links extremely well, but also in a slightly different way to your talk, is that the top users are apparently African users, followed by Asian users, which is really exciting. So there seems to be this amazing new world opening. And I think it's really puzzling. And like Professor Felicitas, I have a nice picture about where we're going. The UK is not so beautiful. And I love riding my bike. So you will see, and apologies, there will be lots of bike pictures coming. You will see men and women in Lycra. I apologize for this. So the real question is basically not whether AI is going to be used in higher education, but it's who is going to shape this. Will it indeed be the big tech companies? Will it be US and China? Sorry to say this, George. It's going to be the US or China. Or will it be us as educators? Will it be us as universities? Will it be us as learners? So I am from the Open University UK, and I'm very privileged that we've been thinking about these kind of questions for a very long time. We're 50 years young, and in a way you could argue that the questions that we're asking are not really new. Because in a way, we've been thinking about how education technology is being used long before we had ChatGPT, long before we had the internet, long before we were even thinking about this distance education. And I have a great privilege of leading amazing researchers in this group. And the Open University in the UK was founded on this really radical idea, very similar to the Open University in Malaysia. Higher quality higher education should be available to anyone, regardless of their background, previous education, age, or location. If you think about this 50 years ago, or 56 years to be exact, that's such a radical idea. Many people thought this would never, ever work. How could meaningful education happen at a distance? How could students learn without sitting in a lecture room that we are in today? How could technology ever replace face-to-face learnings? These questions that I'm raising seem to be very similar than the questions that we've been asking about AI. One thing that I'm always reminded of is when the printer press was invented in Germany, people thought, okay, things are going to be completely different. We don't need Oxford or Bologna because we can just read a book. The same when in the 50s, the radio came along. People thought, okay, this is going to radically change education, how we learn. Can you imagine television? Television was used in the 70s to teach people in the UK. This thing called the internet came along, MOOCs came along, and it was supposed to radically transform education. And some of these predictions are indeed correct. They have transformed education, have made it much more open and accessible. But we're in a way asking similarly, okay, now with AI, are we going to suddenly stop learning and everything is going to change? I guess what I'm trying to say, to a certain degree, I do think that all the predictions that were made in the past were in a way correct. But at the same time, as an educational psychologist, I think some of the predictions that have been stated are just a little bit wrong, because human learning remains remarkably constant. Let me show you how, with some lovely pictures of people wearing lycra clothes. People still need encouragement. People still need feedback. This guy is also called Bart. He's a GP. He became European champion at the European Transplant Games. And the first thing he did was hug his wife. And then I was team captain for the Dutch team. And he was so happy because people just need that kind of encouragement. People still need a sense of belonging. The reason why we're here is we want to belong to something. People still need a purpose. I was checking whether I was first. I was no longer first. I lost my title. I was like, what? And perhaps most importantly of all, people still need other people. So I'm not saying that, everything will be fine, but I do think that there are some things that Gen AI can't do. At the same time, I think for the first time in history, and I've been doing this for the last 25 years, we are no longer in control. The things that tools like Gemini and ChatGPT and Anthropic can do is way beyond what we as educators have ever been building. And here you see, for example, my wife and I's shared account of all the questions we're asking on a daily basis. And the things it gives the answers to is just incredible. So, for the first time in history, students don't even need us to a certain degree. So the big question is, okay, what should we then do? And at the Open University UK, we decided to ask the students, what do they want? So together with students, we developed a range of systems over the last 3 years. And if you're interested of how we've done this, we have written, of course, lots of papers on this. So the first thing we did, and this was an initial study with only 8 students, but we've done over a dozen studies with over 1,200 students. We basically asked, what kind of services would you expect that a university like the Open University would want to give to you? And I think some of these services are typically UK-based, but I guess some of these you probably will recognize as, oh yeah, this is probably something that my students would also want to have. So for example, one student said, and I'm sorry that I'm turning my back, it would allow me to see what I understand or not in the course. ChatGPT or other systems don't know what you're studying or where you're studying, but we could build systems together where we could do this. So I can revise, investigate the subject more in depth. It would be a good way to revise, but to do that, the questions need to be written very clearly. And in some of the examples, the tools that you see here, this is exactly how we started to build this for our students. But obviously there are also downsides of this. We received a lot of criticism from our students on this. So a lot of this criticism was related to ethical concerns, data privacy, and one quote that I absolutely love. I thought a university was about studying, researching, discovering things that mattered to me and my way of learning, not about asking a but for answers or even a path to that. So what in around a dozen studies we have seen is that mostly students worry about trust. Can they trust the system? These are systems at the Open University UK. Can they trust the systems, what they're telling us? Can they trust the data that we have used to make these predictions about them? Can they trust that we as institutions deploy these approaches in the appropriate way? These are in a way not technical questions, and I think this is what links the 5 scholars together, our fellows. It is more about the social, ethical, and educational questions. Education has always been a balance between efficiency, which links very nicely to George's talk, and about humanity, which links very nicely to Felicitas' talk. Artificial intelligence is very good in terms of efficiency, but it's not very good in the kind of the human part that I've showed you, and this is not really a big surprise. So where I want to get to, and I tried not to show you endless regression tables and endless kind of data, where I want to get towards is what kind of human capabilities do we think are becoming more important over time when intelligent machines become more capable? When we started with Ada in 2024, I never thought that Ada would be so good in 2026. So in many ways, the rise of AI may take us to a kind of unique, important qualities of what is really important. This is what is linked also in the previous speakers about curiosity, creativity, empathy, ethical judgments and resilience, which are very difficult to address in a AI environment. So what I would like to conclude is the most important decision that we have to make is not technical. I would argue they are human. How do we use AI to expand the opportunity rather than to deepen the inequality? Bear in mind that this is not a philosophical discussion. This is not something, oh, let's do this slowly, personally. This is 98% of your students are probably using ChatGPT or similar systems at this point in time. So yes, we can take it slowly to think deeply about this, but we have to think, okay, what is the answer if nearly every one of your students is doing this? How can we ensure that the innovation strengthens rather than weakens our trust? At the Open University, around 20 to 25% of our students absolutely do not want us to use this. But the other 75% are expecting that we have the systems in place. So how do we make sure that we do this? How do we create systems that enhance human flourishing rather than optimize performance, which I think links very nicely to George? And perhaps last but most importantly, how do we ensure that learners remain to the center of the future that we're building? I'm really proud that we have all these organizations across the globe of open universities like Open University Malaysia that really give students a second chance. On one of the slides I showed you, we have 20% of our students have an accessibility need. It's fantastic that we do this, but how do we make sure that these AI systems and tutors work to support these students? So I guess in the end it links to the word wisdom. And I think, and I'm really honest here, we do need to hurry up. Because if we don't hurry up, it's going to be others that are going to determine the path on which we're cycling. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Bart Rienties. A fitting end to our discussion so far. Lots of questions raised, demanding more answers, and probably raising even more questions as we develop the conversation. Right, so perhaps we could field a couple of questions from the audience. Anyone? Yes. Rob. Yeah, Xavier.
I did that on purpose.
What?
Look at this freestyle creativity.
Sure. Thank you very much, Bart. I think since you hand me the microphone, I'm going to ask short question, right? All right, I think after listening to all the 5 speakers, it really, broadened up my perspectives about AI, digital education. That really interests me is your early question about what is the purpose of education, right? So, after listening to all the different segmentation of the argument by all the speakers, so that came to my mind is to challenge back the institution, the university, right? Are we solely addressing those who are going to the university for degrees, or we are neglecting those who are coming to the university not to get degrees, but to get specialized education, professional certificates. They don't have to get degree, but they need to get a special, specialized competencies, knowledge, so that they can straight away go to the industry, go to the world of work. So my question to you, Bart, is how do we address this? Do we only focus on AI, digital education, focusing on the proper academic program? Or the university has to be more creative, try to address the different segmentation of the community? We've been talking about people of disability, aging population, people who are, wanting to have jobs, rather than very focused only on digital education. Because to me, AI is only a tool, right? It is a trend. It's not you will be here. It's still alive, right? AI is not a trend or a fad. It's alive. It's going to be with us for many, many years to go. And again, so that's my question to you, right? My question is, what's the role of the university actually? Are we only addressing a segmentation of the population, or we should also look into ourselves how we can play a bigger role to address the different needs of the community? And then you're questioning about how would be the university, the 900 years university now, as compared to before, and how is going to be the future forward of the university, let's say 50 years from now. Will there still be a physical university? I might be thinking there'll be a virtual university. So a university which no longer exists, but people still study online, taking from different parts of the world, and boom, and they go. So I think that's my thoughts for you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Professor Dash. This is really insightful. Personally, I think it's a combination of becoming smarter in how we provide different services to our students. We are very good at open universities and digital universities to get a kind of one-size-fits-all solution. When I teach Introduction to Business Economics, it's the same for everyone. And the only thing you can choose is basically whether you do it quick or slightly slower. But we don't really ask students what do they want. And with AI, and I know I will get criticized by these guys, with AI we can start to provide more personalized approaches. We can develop the same content, but then say for one group of students who like to work together, this is a collaborative approach. For another group of students who say, I don't like to work with people, let's just give lots of assessments. For another group of people, they say, I prefer to get my lectures always in the evening. But we don't do this because it's difficult to scale, and this comes back to Professor Chip's narrative of how do you scale these things in a complex environment. But we, I think, are in the ultimate place because we have so much data and so much wisdom amongst our amazing staff to do this. But I think the real bottleneck, and you're not the bottleneck, but in my university, the real bottleneck is senior management. That is actually, because we've shown in 10 studies, even with 2 randomized control trials, that our system is better than our open university system. But it's really difficult for senior management to make that next step, even with evidence. So I want us to be bolder, because I think the teachers are ready. It's the wider community that perhaps needs a little bit. So thank you.
Right, thank you very much. I think that's all the time we have for the Q&A. Please join me in thanking Professor Bart Rienties for the illuminating lecture. So far we've heard from 5 eminent scholars, our global fellows, offering different perspectives on the futures of digital education. The evening is not quite done yet. We will have a recap after the break. There will be a round table when we will gather our thoughts and see how we intersect, how we digress, how we depart from each other. And that will happen after the coffee break. But before that, I will pass you back to the MC. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. David. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now pause for afternoon tea, served in the same room as lunch earlier. But please remain close by. We'll reconvene at 3:20 p.m. for the concluding roundtable, which brings the day's ideas together. Thank you. See you soon.